Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Morris. I'm the head of marketing at Datacoral. And today I want to introduce a new program that we're offering called the Data Infrastructure for Startups. And this is really the culmination of a series of programs that we've been rolling out lately that help just describe and articulate both the value of a data infrastructure as a service, as well as the overall intention that we have that we're carrying into the market. Anyway, so what we'll talk about today is we'll go through some of the data accessibility issues that we see startups facing. And of course, we're a startup ourselves. So much of this even applies to me as a marketer. Raghu, my CEO, also has these same types of issues that I'll address and introduce in a second. We'll talk about Datacoral's solution. I will talk again a little bit about some of the startups that are using us, but and then I'll introduce the program itself and take questions from the audience if we have any. So let's start with the first, let's say, two sets of issues for that we see startups facing. Number one is it's highly likely in this age that your innovation as a startup relies heavily on data, right? It's your data innovation is at the heart of your idea, whether that's the original social mobile analytic cloud kind of application. We have a number of customers that are operating in the gig economy. We see mobile development all the time. We see logistics automation development all the time. MarTech is very big, automating business operations, et cetera. And then there's the new evolution of types of solution or types of technologies being applied to these problem spaces, whether it's Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, more clever and cost affordable cloud deployments, those kind of things. And then there's a plethora of business automation systems and engineering automation systems, et cetera. So let's just give you a sense of an engineering stack that I picked this up out of Cloud Native Computing Foundation has over 100 different types of technologies, platforms, analytic tools, storage systems, containers, hosting tools, infrastructure automation capabilities, the cloud providers themselves. There's a huge array of platform technologies that your engineering organization is likely to be using in establishing what you're going to build. And the reason I bring that up is because in many cases, that information you may want to inform your warehousing and analytic functionality and capabilities. So this could be and ultimately become an array of data sourcings or data targets that you want to be publishing your information to, is take advantage of the capabilities of each one of these types of systems. And then on my other old favorite one is the Chief Martech marketing technology landscape, the Martech 5000, which is built by Scott Brinker. He's been doing that for years, but this is a jam-packed area of again, different data sources, different analytic tooling, different commerce and selling tools, different social engagement tools, content and experience automation, advertising and promotion tracking and automation, and way down in the data column in the iPaaS cloud data integration and tag management area, you'll start to see the kind of systems that Datacoral would end up competing with: the data integration stacks, the cloud automation stacks, and the data warehouse automation systems. So again, a huge array of available sourcings. But then you've got both these this massive amount of both engineering and information automation systems that are generating data for you. But then how are you going to end up managing that? And this is a really typical problem: is you usually don't have enough resources, whether it's in your original engineering organization, in your data engineering setup, in your data science, or your analytics setup. Is those resources are going to be very busy right out the chute, regardless of the size startup that you are. And you're always going to be hoping that they actually have more hours in the day than a normal person. Of course, your time to market pressures are also really precious here, is getting your product to market quickly, finding out the proper product market fit as rapidly as you can, and then iterating using that information, that operational information, to inform you as to what the behaviors of your customers are doing, those type of things to help you build a better, more appropriate product for your audience. So those time to market pressures are huge. And then, of course, financially, your pressure there is spend your money as wisely as possible. Oftentimes, that now means pick a cloud environment to begin with. Whether that's Datacoral has picked AWS, the most popular cloud. You could be picking Azure. You could be picking GCP. You could be picking Alibaba. There's a number of cloud players out there. But as the stacks grow within the cloud, I'll show you in a moment, you'll see that there's a wide breadth of capabilities available in the Amazon Web Services stack. And of course, you want to deploy this and have it operate as cost effectively as you go. And I will describe the advantages of deploying a serverless technology in your cloud, is that it really maps to the best pay per use or pay as you go kind of model. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, you want to execute and inform your product development processes all along the way, using all the available data sources and systems that you have at your disposal. So let's just look at the Datacoral's view, or our view, of what the data pipeline landscape looks like today. And oftentimes it really zeroes in on some specific functions, the ELT or ETL functions, getting data out of those source systems, usually laying them into an S3 bucket or a stable storage environment where that raw data can exist in perpetuity, loading it into a warehouse to get the centralization benefits of that information. And the modern technique is to transform it in the warehouse itself, rather than try and transform the data before you load it in, because space is pretty ample in your data warehouse, and processing power is, of course, also really ample there as well. And then ultimately, you want to have that information available to analytic systems, operational systems, your machine learning environments, wherever the consuming applications might end up living. And you see, we put up here a number of different technologies that are available in each of these particular points of the solution, of this pathway, or this a set of processes. What we find as an issue, however, is that everywhere along the way right now, because these are point solutions for orchestration or for query definition and transformation construction, or for data ingest exercises on the extract side, each of these has some kind of manual intervention point that is the handoff point between each of these different functional areas. So there may be data integration exercises to make your extraction tool schedule operate accordingly as to what how you define it in your cloud environment. There may be API work that you have to do against those data sources to actually make them work with whatever extraction environment or tooling you might have deployed. Then there's the loading the data into your warehouse. You have an array of choices there. It could be Snowflake, it could be Redshift, it could be Athena, and what kind of transformations are you performing in there? And as you're operating in the warehouse, of course, you want to be operating in SQL itself, right? Is the universal the universal data language, and not have situations where there's a SQL dialect or functional impositions that are made inside the SQL environment, inside the transformation environment, that make it difficult to toggle in and out of perhaps the query as it's running inside of the warehouse and the query as it might be defined in operating in the pipeline. There's, as I mentioned a moment ago, scheduling and workflow management orchestration tools like Luigi or Airflow or Glue. Those all require some degree of manual intervention in scheduling that information, and then getting it, once you've got your refined information, getting it into whether the analytic tools or the operational and machine learning tools, again, may require more manual intervention in each one of those points. And there's some other interesting areas that, as we look at this kind of um, uh, array of pipeline componentry, is that how do you, when you have a data pipeline that consists of all of these different sets of tooling, is how do you manage changes either in the data, in the schema, or in the schedule, or in or anomalies in the pipeline as it's flowing. Oftentimes, the handoff between the ingestion tool and the cloud environment, or the handoff between the data that was dropped in S3 and into the warehouse, or the handoff between the orchestration tools, is how do you know when things change? Right, so that overall change management and monitoring is a really big requirement here, and unfortunately, this takes on the same kind of situation when your resources are building, and operating in all of these different environments at once. Their activities of being able to work inside the data get overwhelmed in their patching and healing the system. I use analogies oftentimes of, is your data engineer really an engineer who's building things and adding value into the data pipeline, using their SQL skills? Are they an engineer building new things and building on top of older things? Or are they a doctor? Are they always constantly trying to return the system to its last best steady state, right? Healing it instead of making it better, stronger, faster. So that's an interesting way to characterize the workload that a data engineer might be performing when they're using this, again, this array of different tool sets. And the other observation is, I come from a long history of open source products, including SendMail and Actuate-BERT, an Eclipse-based tool, and Neo4j, a very popular graph database. And always the argument is to be careful about, when you're picking open source toolings, is how much of that responsibility falls on your data engineering or your engineering staff to maintain that set of open source tools over time. I had an old product, a VP of product, who used to refer to it as the free as a puppy kind of problem. Is, getting a free puppy is awesome and adorable, but raising a free puppy is still an awful lot of work. And you just want to make sure that when, as a startup, your resources are used appropriately. So ultimately, let's talk about Datacoral for a second. Our goal here is to deliver a data infrastructure as a service for analysts and data engineers and data scientists, to use an intuitive, very SQL-centric data programming interface to build and operationalize data pipelines. And what makes us special here is that this is designed by experts who built the data infrastructures at Yahoo, Facebook, when they were growing from terabytes to petabytes. We have members of the AWS Redshift team. We have folks who are at Groupon and MuleSoft and Splunk. So the many popular 21st century unicorns, these are the folks who are building infrastructures there and now applying it to modern day cloud environments. So looking beyond this typical ELT or ETL capabilities, Datacoral really is, at its core, an AWS-centric and an AWS-Best practice ELT environment. Extract, load, and transform into your AWS-centric data warehouse, whether that's Redshift, Snowflake, or Athena, and use your SQL skills to build a data pipeline that is really within that warehouse environment. Of course, it does handle all of the data ingestion capabilities from more than 75 different systems, and getting it into your S3 for, again, both reuse and data recovery capabilities, and then analyze and publish the data, the refined data, wherever it needs to go, whether it's your favorite BI tool like Mode or Looker, or an operational system like MySQL, or directly into perhaps some of those original source systems like Salesforce or Zendesk. You could put a Zendesk-based customer satisfaction score inside of Salesforce, so you knew that your customers were happy and ready to increase their spend with you, those kind of things. So what I really want to, and then highlighting the core capabilities of Datacoral, where we go beyond the traditional ELT sets of arguments and sets of capabilities, is number one, we're serverless, right? So we support a very, very cloud modern deployment capability. And there's two things that are really important about this serverless nature is one, serverless really is the best pay per use model that you can get in the cloud right now. Is you're only paying for the resources that you're using, and you're only paying for the resource time that is taking to execute those things. And because we're operate inside of AWS Lambdas mostly as our serverless environment, Lambdas typically are only running for 5 to 15 minutes at a time. So you're only paying for within your Lambda bill in AWS those incremental usage steps inside of your environment. The second benefit of being serverless is it's secure. It lives inside of your own VPC. So we never see the data. What's interesting about that? We see information about metadata. We see information about monitoring and operations and changes, but your data never leaves your control. It's secured with your keys. You own it. You see it, and we don't. And that's really different from many of the ingestion tools or many of the information processing tools that are out there that make you pipe your data into their environment for some period of time and then receive it back when they've done their work. This happens all within your environment. And there's a nice security boost there that you typically won't see. Next is orchestrating all of these activities, where we say the ELT activities live inside of the data warehouse. Orchestrating the timings of a data pipeline and the dependencies of a data pipeline often involves multiple stages of the pipeline. You might grab information from Salesforce and boil that down to specific account and customer and user information or product information. And then you might combine that with data from Zendesk, but that might also be their service tickets and the customer account, the customer who's having issues. And then you might also combine that with your billing system. What's their spend or the fiscal impact of their customer sat score. So making sure that your dependencies of getting data from each of these systems and getting it into that refined state so it lands on your support dashboard correctly is really what's involved in this orchestration exercise. And we see our customers using all kinds of other external systems, the most popular one, I think, being Airflow, the Airbnb contribution to Apache. And while that's a great tool for workload management and tying systems together within a data pipeline, if that orchestration capability is available directly in the pipeline, you are eliminating one of those handoff steps and carrying that all the way through from the beginning of the pipeline lifecycle to the very end of the pipeline lifecycle. So orchestration is really important here. Next one is change awareness, right? Because you have that visibility upwards and downwards throughout the pipeline, you actually get to see immediately changes in schema. And you can evaluate the impact of that change, that schema change, downstream into the pipeline. And likewise, you get to see the impact of data values with change data capture support built into the pipeline. So it knows if you need to update a customer record or you need to update something, that you can indeed capture that value and then carry it forward. So that change awareness is really key. And of course, that comes along with monitoring tools, whether jobs are succeeding or there's some kind of data quality issue that's making a load job you consume a lot of resources. Those kind of situations that are often caused by just really goofy anomalies in the data. Those are picked up within the data pipeline, and that's really important. And understanding its both upstream and downstream impact is really key, because when you're dealing in a data pipeline, of course, if there's a contamination early in the pipeline, if it gets downstream very far, then you're contaminating lots and lots. The pass through is is really critical. That all of that information could become tainted and unreliable. So being able to shut that portion of the pipeline off, or if it does get contaminated, is to backfill and rerun the jobs once the data error has been found and corrected, so that you bring the data back to a safe and steady and usable state, is also a key capability of the data pipeline. Next is publishing this information. Oftentimes, we like to talk about ourselves as being ELTP, right? So we're publishing that refined, clean, trustworthy data to analytic systems, to machine learning systems, to operational systems as well. And another one is actually loading and managing the warehouse itself. Is in many cases, we've seen with our customers, I'll talk about in a second, is we've seen their warehouses grow dramatically because they're both adding sources as well as consuming data at a much more rapid rate. So you need to scale your data warehouse appropriately, or be able to handle spikes in perhaps user traffic, or spikes in data jobs. That backfill job might take a long time, so you've got to scale your data warehouse capabilities accordingly, and we do that automatically in the environment. When I talk about what Datacoral is built from, is it's AWS native capabilities. AWS called this Cradle a couple of years ago. It's Kinesis, Redshift, Aurora, DynamoDB, and Lambda are their cloud native or AWS native systems that they're encouraging organizations to buy from. So again, that's the best practice kind of development and deployment capabilities inside of AWS. But as you can see, we use a number of other capabilities from Amazon Web Services, and ultimately abstract that away from you so you don't have to worry about it. Your users are only caring about building correct SQL statements inside of Redshift or Athena or Snowflake, and then making sure that is synced up with the larger data pipeline when they have a query that they like or works. So insulating you, leveraging all of these core capabilities of AWS, but also insulating you from needing to know the 21 systems that are posed right here. And of course, as I said, we've got a massive slice catalog. Slices are the connectors or what we call connectors, whether that's the extraction connectors, we call those collect slices, whether it's organization or organize slices, which are the ones that you would use for transformation, or publishing or harnessing slices that allow you to put the data wherever you want it to go. So let's talk very quickly about a couple of customers before I roll the program. We do have a larger set of presentation on this particular topic. Greenhouse is one of our flagship customers. They're a very, very popular New York City startup. They're Series D right now. They're recognized as being one of the best places to work in New York City, and the success things that they've realized in using Datacoral as their data infrastructure is they're able to answer the questions that they want about churn candidates, or saving IT costs, or ultimately allocating the data scientists to doing data science work, allowing them to increase their time in data from let's say an hour every 5 hours of their work time to 4 out of 5 hours of their work time spent inside the data itself. So moving from that 20% to 80%. And you can see their cluster itself grew from 4 to 48 nodes in under 2 years right now. So their data consumption grew pretty dramatically. It continues to grow dramatically. And they recognize this as being an essential piece of their overall infrastructure. Front's a collaboration inbox. Again, a San Francisco-based Series B startup. They're very, very successful at the moment, 5,000 customers, and their success results are very similar. And their intention was actually quite similar in terms of they wanted to know how customers were using their product, to figure out what the indicators were for customers dropping off, and evaluating their own internal company performance metrics. So they became smarter faster, which is great. They saved a ton of money in terms of being able to invest in data engineering analysts instead of needing to manage the externals of the pipeline. And they grew their Redshift cluster fivefold in 2 years. And from this standpoint, the informing their product roadmap or telling them what, using data to inform them about what their customers want in their product is a really key benefit here that they're seeing. Jyve is another Series A startup in San Francisco, operating in the gig economy, in the grocer industry. They have contract workers that are called Jyvers that are certified for stocking and performing in-store tasks across a series of different types of retailers, typically grocers and folks who've got perishable inventory. So they go around, stock the shelves. They provide visibility into points of sale. They provide visibility into inventory in each one of the stores, and that trickles back to not only the store itself, but also the product distributors, and then even further back in the supply chain to the brands themselves, that like Pepsi or Coke or Frito-Lay or Procter & Gamble. All of those folks who've got a series of products that ultimately end up in a grocery, in a market, those brands get visibility into that last 100 feet of the product getting off the truck and then onto the retailer's shelves. So they're seeing savings in resources. They have a great 360-degree view of their overall marketing and operations, what it takes to recruit a Jyver, what it takes to keep a Jyver. Those are many of the capabilities that they're seeing in their environment. But let's go back to that original set of startup problems, right? It's always, people, time, or money. And what I just actually showed you is instances where Greenhouse is actually managing their resources more effectively. So they're able to apply people to the right parts of their business and the right parts of their problem. Front is able to execute on time to market capabilities by building the right product as informed by the data infrastructure that is driving their roadmap. And of course, Jyve is managing their finances using us as their ELT pipeline at a fraction of the cost that they would have had to invest themselves. So again, back to our startup benefits, the resources you have are people, time, and cash, and all of those are precious. Those are the kinds of areas that Datacoral can affect for you. So let's talk quickly about the Data Infrastructure for Startups program itself. And here, what you get is a full Datacoral installation and onboarding in your AWS environment. We're doing aggressively discounted licensing of the product itself. So if for a small package for a small startup would often look like 3 slices and 5 million rows of data ingested per month for $24K annually, and we would true that up over after 2 years. Or for a larger startup that's a little bit more established in the market, we'll offer 10 slices. That could be something like 7 collect sources, an organized slice to operate within your warehouse, and maybe a couple of publishing slices to put that refined data back into your operation. So 10 slices and 10 million rows of data per month for $36K annually, and we'll true that up after 3 years. So you can basically get a very, very predictable understanding of what your overall spend is going to look like inside of your environment in adopting the Datacoral directly. We will also, on a time and materials basis, offer consulting assistance in designing data solutions, which I'll talk to in a second. And then also we'll offer warehouse management assistance for helping you manage those, spiky loads, like when you're having to backfill something that data that was ingested inappropriately and contaminates the downstream pipeline, or spiky loads in terms of user concurrency. Maybe you have 5 users and moving to 25 users all doing ad hoc exercises inside of Redshift. We even help our customers resize and migrate their data warehousing systems. I think one of these customers I just showed you is actually, we've helped them migrate their environment 8 times as they've upgraded their different data warehouse environment. So the data solutions that we actually have expertise in right now, there's some interesting ones here that we want to call out. And I think you'll see us develop these data solutions over time and bring those out as truer product offerings as we look forward. We'll support, we've done gap reporting for startups, which is a financial requirement and typically uses systems like NetSuite. We'll do data product delivery metrics. This is great for product management and engineering. So that could be drawing data from your production system, your product. Oftentimes it's Postgres or some other MySQL, those kind of things. Then it could also include customer support information, your code information stored in GitHub, and your check-in, check-out information. We'll give you project management information from Jira. We'll give you customer information from NetSuite, et cetera. And to really round out what's happening in the product itself, we'll help with sales operations. Oftentimes that's Salesforce integration, some kind of outreach or email system integration like Outreach or MailChimp, a marketing automation system like HubSpot, and then get into other more precise web and user reaction types of systems like A/B testing. There we've integrated with LaunchDarkly, Google Analytics, FullStory, which is a user behavior tracking system on your website. So those kind of systems we're familiar with. Additional customer usage and customer sat indicators for customer support. That might include, again, your product system, your production system. Delighted is a customer satisfaction system, Zendesk as well. Churn analysis, we've mentioned a lot. Redshift optimization, I've mentioned earlier, is will help you get and optimize Redshift all the way through and through your environment, and even will help you with compliance with international standards like GDPR, or even local standards like the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA data. And then we do this by keeping track of where the data comes from, using our own evaluating information that comes from Datacoral directly, like our DAG itself, so you can see where the data has come from, where it has been published to, and give you that full end-to-end analysis of what's happening with your customer data. And even if you needed to provide a capability where the customer wants to remove their data from your internal systems, we can actually help you prove that out using the same capability. So that pretty much concludes my prepared remarks. I'll summarize very, very quickly in terms of the overall environment of Datacoral is a series of mostly Lambdas installed in your environment. We take the headache out of managing the data pipeline itself and allow you to focus on the data transform exercises inside the pipeline using your SQL skills. It typically, gives a data engineer, an instant productivity boost. There's no security concerns because it lives in your AWS account. And even though we're helping manage the externals of the system, we don't see your data. It's resilient to changes and very extensible in terms of what we can add to it. Adding a collection slice, for example, only takes a couple of weeks for us to do, from both start to finish testing to deployment. I'd give it maybe a month. So very, very easy to add new systems. Ultimately, we do have in the works an SDK to allow you to build slices yourself. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, very cost effective due to its serverless design and deployment capabilities. You see where your expenses are going. You see exactly how much you're spending. What's really interesting even about that is because you control the timings in the orchestration exercises, as well as have visibility into your AWS consumption, which when it's reflected in Datacoral may be your Lambda usage and your Redshift usage. You can choose how much or how little simply by accelerating or dialing back the execution speed of your data pipeline. You can really pretty finely manage your data infrastructure costs and your data consumption costs. So as I mentioned, SQL is really our constant, and we're trying to encourage organizations to adopt the serverless model because of the pricing. You don't have to over purchase capacity. It's a much better pay-as-you-go model. If you're using that collection of lots of different systems, there's handoff points and frailties likely to be in that. And this isn't to disparage how clever your engineering resources are, but it's also to point out that their time may be better spent in the data instead of around it. That AWS nativity, serverless deployment, secure in your VPC, as I've mentioned, really supporting that best practice ELT-M, right, for managing the data warehouse, and supporting extensions to that pipeline, end-to-end infrastructure as a service with orchestration, that change awareness, that publishing capability, built by people who have done this before, built by people who really were at the 21st century unicorns during their big growth spurts. So you really need to know, over 100 of these APIs, products, and technologies to implement and execute what Datacoral is offering, and juxtapose that to the amount of time you would be able to spend inside the data itself, working on how the data makes you and your business and your product more valuable. So that really concludes my prepared remarks. Thanks, everybody, and that will conclude our event.